The handwritten letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, tucked inside a care package from her grandmother, and Tessa Crawford had no idea it would change everything. She was sitting cross-legged on her apartment floor, surrounded by crumpled wrapping paper and the warm scent of her grandmother's homemade cookies, when she noticed the cream-colored envelope with elegant handwriting that definitely wasn't her grandmother's spidery script. Inside was a single sheet of expensive stationery and a note from Grandma Rose explaining that she'd met a charming young man at the community center who'd mentioned feeling isolated lately, and would Tessa mind writing to him. He was looking for a pen pal, someone to correspond with in this digital age, and Rose had thought of her granddaughter immediately. Tessa laughed, shaking her head at her grandmother's eternal matchmaking attempts, though this one seemed particularly old-fashioned. Who even had pen pals anymore? Still, the letter itself was intriguing. The handwriting was bold and confident, masculine, and the message was simple: a stranger reaching out across the void, hoping to connect with someone real in a world that felt increasingly artificial. She found herself reading it 3 times before she realized she was already composing a response in her head. That evening, after finishing her shift at the botanical garden where she worked as a horticulturist, Tessa sat at her small kitchen table with a cup of tea and actually pulled out stationery. She'd received a set as a gift years ago and never used it. The act of writing by hand felt foreign at first, her fingers cramping around the pen, but then something shifted. Without the pressure of immediate response, without the anxiety of typing and deleting and retyping, words flowed onto the page with surprising ease. She told him about her work with rare orchids, about the satisfaction of coaxing something beautiful into bloom. She told him about her tiny apartment with its fire escape garden, about how she'd moved to the city 3 years ago with big dreams and modest means. She kept it light, friendly, careful not to reveal too much to a complete stranger but honest enough to feel like herself. She signed it simply, Tessa. His reply came faster than she expected, less than a week later. This time it was addressed directly to her, forwarded through her grandmother, who was clearly delighted with herself. His name was Peter, and he wrote about feeling trapped by expectations, about the loneliness that came from being surrounded by people who wanted something from you. He didn't elaborate, and Tessa found herself curious. He asked thoughtful questions about her work, remembered details from her letter, and shared his own love of growing things, though he admitted he was terrible at it. There was something in his writing, a kind of raw honesty that she recognized. He wasn't trying to impress her. He was just trying to be seen. Tessa wrote back, and then he wrote back, and suddenly weeks were passing in a blur of anticipation. She found herself rushing home from work to check her mailbox, her heart doing a stupid little leap whenever she saw that cream-colored envelope. Peter's letters became longer, more revealing. He told her about losing his father young, about the weight of responsibility that had fallen on his shoulders before he was ready. He told her about insomnia and early morning walks, about feeling like he was living someone else's life. She told him about her own father walking out when she was 12, about her mother working 3 jobs to keep them afloat, about the scholarship that had changed her trajectory. She told him about the ex-boyfriend who'd called her dreams too small, about proving him wrong 1 orchid at a time. 3 months in, Tessa realized she was falling for someone she'd never met. It was absurd. It was 19th century. It was the most real thing she'd felt in years. Peter's letters had become the highlight of her week. She knew the feel of his handwriting, could trace the way his mood showed in his script, tight and controlled when he was stressed, loose and flowing when he was relaxed. She knew he took his coffee black, that he ran every morning at dawn, that he had a scar on his left hand from a childhood accident involving a boat and bad judgment. She knew he was funny and self-deprecating and deeply thoughtful. She knew he listened, really listened, in a way that made her feel like her words mattered. What she didn't know was what he looked like, where exactly he lived, or what he did for a living. He'd been vague about work, mentioning only that it was demanding and sometimes soul-crushing, that it took up too much of his life. She'd shared similar frustrations about her own modest salary, about how she sometimes took freelance garden design work just to make rent. She also didn't know that she was going to meet him, not in the way either of them planned. It happened on a crisp October morning when Tessa was called to an emergency consultation at a private estate across the river. The botanical garden occasionally did contract work for wealthy clients, and apparently someone with money to burn had managed to nearly kill an entire greenhouse worth of rare tropical plants and needed immediate intervention. The pay was too good to refuse, even if it meant spending her Saturday dealing with what would probably be an entitled rich person who treated living things like decorative objects. The address led her to a sprawling property that made her whistle low under her breath. The main house was a modern masterpiece of glass and stone, all clean lines and expensive taste. She was directed by a housekeeper around to the back, where a massive greenhouse stood like a crystal palace. Inside was a massacre. Brown leaves, drooping stems, soil that was either waterlogged or bone dry. Tessa winced, rolling up her sleeves. This was going to take hours. She was elbow-deep in repotting soil, her hair falling out of its bun and dirt smudged across her cheek, when she heard footsteps behind her. "I know it's bad. You don't have to say it." The voice was deep, rueful, and touched with genuine regret. Tessa turned, prepared to deliver her professional lecture about plant care, and found herself looking up at a man who made her forget every word of it. He was tall, probably a few inches over 6 feet, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it, and sharp features that would have been severe if not for the warmth in his gray eyes. He wore jeans and a plain black t-shirt, both clearly expensive despite their simplicity, and held 2 cups of coffee like a peace offering. "It's pretty bad," she admitted, finding her voice. "What happened?" "I happened," he said, offering her one of the cups. "I inherited these from my mother. She had the green thumb in the family. I apparently inherited my father's ability to kill anything that can't explicitly tell me what it needs." Tessa accepted the coffee, noticing the calluses on his hands, not soft, rich guy hands. "Well, some of these can be saved. Some are too far gone." "When was the last time anyone watered them?" "Honestly, I'm not sure. I've been traveling for work. I left instructions with the staff, but I think there was confusion about who was responsible." He looked genuinely distressed, staring at a wilting orchid that might have been beautiful once. "My mother would kill me if she could see this." Something in his voice, the quiet grief underneath the self-deprecation, made Tessa's chest tighten. "When did you lose her?" 2 years ago. Cancer." He said it simply, but she could hear the weight behind the word. These were her pride and joy. "I've been trying to maintain them, but clearly I'm failing." "You're not failing," Tessa said, surprising herself with her gentleness. Usually she had little patience for wealthy clients who neglected their plants. "You're just in over your head. It happens. The good news is most of these are salvageable with proper care. I can set up a maintenance schedule, teach your staff the basics, or come by regularly myself if you prefer." "Would you?" He looked at her with such relief that she found herself smiling. "I'll pay whatever it costs. I just want to honor her memory, keep this place the way she loved it." "I'll write up a proposal," Tessa said. "But first, let me do some triage. This is going to take most of the day." "I'll help," he said immediately. "You don't have to do that. I'm sure you have better things to do." Actually, I don't. His smile was self-deprecating. And I should probably learn how to take care of these properly. Consider me your assistant for the day. His name was Patrick Rosewood, she learned as they worked. He was surprisingly good at following instructions, careful with the delicate roots, patient with the slow work of rehabilitation. He asked questions that showed he was actually listening, made her laugh with stories of his botanical failures, and seemed genuinely grateful for her expertise. They worked through the morning and into the afternoon, the greenhouse growing warm with sunlight and the subtle intimacy of shared purpose. Patrick had the housekeeper bring them lunch, and they ate sandwiches sitting on upturned crates, dirt under their fingernails, surrounded by plants in various stages of recovery. "Can I ask you something?" Patrick said, setting down his water bottle. "Why plants? What made you want to do this?" Tessa considered the question, twirling a leaf between her fingers. "They're honest. You put in the work, give them what they need, and they grow. They don't lie or play games or want something from you other than care. And there's something magic about helping something thrive, about seeing potential where other people just see dirt and seeds." He was quiet for a moment, studying her with an intensity that made her skin warm. "That's beautiful. I wish I saw the world that way." "How do you see it?" "Complicated. Transactional, everyone wanting something." He caught himself shaking his head. "Sorry, that's cynical. That's honest," Tessa said. "What do you do, for work, I mean?" "I run the family business. Import-export, investments, various holdings. It's boring corporate stuff." He said it dismissively, clearly uncomfortable. Nothing as interesting as making things grow. Tessa didn't push, though she was curious. There was something about Patrick that felt familiar, like she knew him from somewhere she couldn't quite place. It was probably just because he was easy to talk to, because the conversation flowed the way it did with old friends instead of new acquaintances. By the time the sun was setting, the greenhouse looked transformed. Plants were properly watered, pruned, and repositioned. The dying orchids had been given emergency treatment. The air smelled like fresh soil and possibility. "Thank you," Patrick said as he walked her to her car, carrying her equipment. "Really, this means more than you know." "Just doing my job," Tessa said, but she was smiling. "I'll email you that proposal for regular maintenance. Please do. And Tessa," he paused, seeming to wrestle with something, "would you be willing to come back, not just professionally? I could use the help learning to care for these properly. I'll pay for your time, of course." There was something in his voice, almost vulnerable, that made her say yes before her practical side could list all the reasons it was a bad idea to get personally involved with a wealthy client. She drove home as streetlights flickered on, her mind churning. Patrick Rosewood was attractive, kind, and clearly grieving. He was also probably way out of her league, living in a different world with his estate and his housekeeper and his family business. This was just work, professional, nothing to get excited about. But when she got home and found Peter's latest letter waiting in her mailbox, she felt a strange twist of guilt, which was ridiculous. Peter was a pen pal, a friend, someone she'd never met and probably never would. There was nothing wrong with being attracted to a client, even if she had no intention of acting on it. She made tea and settled in to read Peter's letter, and the guilt deepened because his words made her heart race in a way that had nothing to do with physical attraction. He wrote about progress, about trying to reclaim parts of himself he'd lost, about how her letters had become a kind of anchor in choppy waters. He wrote about wishing they could meet, but understanding if she wanted to keep this safely in the realm of paper and ink. Tessa read the letter 3 times, then picked up her pen. She told Peter about the greenhouse, about the satisfaction of saving something beautiful from neglect. She told him about the client who'd helped all day despite clearly having better things to do, about how it reminded her that wealth and kindness weren't mutually exclusive. She didn't mention Patrick by name, didn't mention the way her pulse had jumped when their hands accidentally brushed while repotting an orchid. She told Peter she'd like to meet him someday, when the timing was right, because she valued their connection too much to lose it to the uncertainty of reality. She signed it with an honesty that scared her. Your friend, always, Tessa. The next 3 weeks fell into an unexpected rhythm. Tessa visited Patrick's greenhouse twice a week, ostensibly to oversee the plant recovery and train him in proper care. In reality, those sessions became something else entirely. They talked while they worked, covering everything from philosophy to favorite foods to childhood dreams. Patrick was wickedly funny once he relaxed, with a dry wit that caught her off guard. He was also deeply lonely, she realized, in a way that had nothing to do with being alone. "Don't you have friends you spend time with?" she asked one afternoon while they were misting the orchids. "Associates. Business partners. People who want access to the Rosewood name and money." He said it matter-of-factly without self-pity. "I had friends once before my father died and everything changed, but that life doesn't leave much room for genuine connections." "That sounds exhausting." "It is." He glanced at her, something soft in his expression. "This is nice, though, being able to just talk without any agenda." Tessa felt her cheeks warm. "Well, my agenda is keeping your mother's plants alive, so there's that. I can live with that agenda." Meanwhile, Peter's letters continued to arrive with faithful regularity, and Tessa found herself in the strange position of having feelings for 2 men simultaneously. Except, they felt like different kinds of feelings. With Patrick, it was physical and immediate, attraction mixed with genuine liking, the electricity of possibility. With Peter, it was deeper somehow, built on months of emotional intimacy, on knowing someone's fears and hopes and dreams. She could talk to Patrick for hours, but she could bare her soul to Peter. It felt like being split in two. She told Peter about her confusion in her next letter, carefully avoiding names and identifying details. She told him about meeting someone who made her laugh, who she was attracted to, but how it felt different from what they had. She asked if that made her terrible to have feelings for 2 people at once. His response came quickly, and it made her cry. Peter wrote that feelings weren't finite, that the heart was capable of holding multiple truths at once. He wrote that he wanted her to be happy, even if that happiness didn't include him. He wrote that he'd been struggling with similar feelings, that there was someone in his life who made him feel seen in a different way than she did, but that didn't diminish what they shared. He wrote that maybe they were meant to be friends, deep and abiding friends, and that was beautiful too. He wrote that he hoped someday they could meet, compare notes on their respective romantic entanglements, laugh about the absurdity of falling for people through handwritten letters. He signed it, "Your friend, always, Peter." Tessa sat in her kitchen holding the letter, feeling something crack open in her chest. It was permission and loss all at once. She'd been falling in love with Peter, she realized, and he'd been doing the same with someone else. They'd been circling each other in words, building something beautiful and impossible, and now they were gently releasing each other to reality. It hurt. It also felt right. She let herself cry, then washed her face and made a decision. Life was short. Connection was rare. If Patrick made her feel even a fraction of what Peter's letters did, it was worth exploring. She wasn't going to hide behind paper anymore. The next time she went to the greenhouse, she dressed with more care than usual. Nothing obvious, just jeans that fit well and a soft green sweater that brought out her eyes. Patrick noticed immediately, his gaze lingering in a way that made her breath catch. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the physical ease between them growing with familiarity. Then Patrick spoke, his voice careful. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Sure," Tessa said, repotting a fern that was finally showing new growth. "Are you seeing anyone?" Her hands stilled. "No, not exactly. It's complicated." "Complicated how?" She set down her trowel, wiping dirt on her jeans. "I've been writing letters to someone. A pen pal thing my grandmother set up. We've never met, probably never will, but I care about him. Cared about him. I don't know, it's confusing." "Letters," Patrick repeated, his voice strange. "Like actual handwritten letters. I know it's old-fashioned. But yeah, there's something about it that feels more real than texting or email, or it did." She risked a glance at him. "Why do you ask?" Patrick was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. "What's his name, your pen pal?" "Peter." "Why?" He made a sound that might have been a laugh or a groan, running a hand through his hair. Of course it is." "What, Patrick, what's wrong?" "Tessa." He turned to face her fully, and there was something in his eyes that made her heart slam against her ribs. "My full name is Patrick Peter Rosewood. I go by Patrick professionally with family. But my friends, my mother, she called me Peter." The greenhouse went very still. Tessa's mind was racing, connecting dots, reshuffling reality. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I think we've been writing to each other. For months. I'm saying your grandmother Rose met me at the community center where I've been volunteering, trying to feel less useless. I'm saying I wrote to a stranger asking for connection, and I got you." His voice cracked slightly. "I've been falling for you twice, Tessa, through letters and in person, and I didn't even know it." She couldn't breathe, couldn't process. "But you said there was someone else. In your last letter you said you had feelings for someone." "You," he said simply. "It was you. I was writing to you about you, and I didn't realize it." Tessa started laughing, slightly hysterical because it was absurd. It was impossible. It was the most ridiculous, wonderful coincidence in the history of coincidences. "All this time," she managed. "All this time I was falling for the same person twice." Patrick crossed the space between them in 2 strides, his hands coming up to frame her face with a gentleness that stole her breath. "Can I kiss you?" "I've wanted to kiss you since the first day you showed up covered in dirt with fire in your eyes. And I've wanted to kiss you since the first letter you sent me where you talked about coaxing beauty into bloom. I've wanted to kiss you twice, Tessa Crawford, and I'd very much like to do it once." She kissed him first, rising on her toes to close the distance, and it was everything. It was months of words and weeks of longing and the perfect collision of heart and reality. He tasted like coffee and possibility, and his hands were gentle on her face, and she thought this. This was what all those love stories were trying to capture. This feeling of coming home to someone you didn't know you'd been searching for. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Patrick rested his forehead against hers. "I can't believe I almost lost you before I even found you," he said. "If you'd taken my last letter as a goodbye, if you'd decided that client who made you laugh wasn't worth pursuing. If you'd decided your pen pal was enough and you didn't need reality," Tessa added, "we would have missed this." "No more letters," Patrick said. "I want to talk to you every day, see your face, hear your voice. I want reality with you, Tessa, all of it." "No more letters," she agreed. "But I'm keeping the ones we wrote. All of them. Deal." They kissed again, slower this time, learning each other. Around them, the greenhouse was warm with late afternoon sun, and the orchids her grandmother's pen pal had nearly killed were beginning to bloom. Later, after they'd finished the day's work and were sitting on the greenhouse floor sharing a bottle of wine Patrick had retrieved from the house, Tessa asked the question that had been nagging at her. "Why didn't you tell me who you were? About the money, the business empire. You made it sound like you were just some guy with a demanding job." Patrick was quiet for a moment, swirling wine in his glass. Because that's all I wanted to be. When I wrote to you, I didn't know you were going to become this. I just wanted someone to see me as Patrick, not as the Rosewood heir or the millionaire or the CEO. With you in those letters, I could just be a guy who was lonely and tired and trying to figure out how to be happy. You didn't treat me differently because of money. Would I have if I'd known? Maybe not intentionally, but it changes things, Tessa. It always does. People see dollar signs instead of person. He looked at her, vulnerable. You saw me. Both times, in letters and in person, you just saw me. Do you know how rare that is? Tessa's throat tightened. For what it's worth, I still just see you. The money doesn't change anything. It changes some things, Patrick said honestly. It's going to be part of our reality if we do this. The expectations, the publicity, the people who will have opinions about us. My world is complicated and I need you to know what you're signing up for. I'm signing up for you, Tessa said firmly. The rest we'll figure out together. Patrick pulled her close, kissing her temple. Together. I like the sound of that. The next few months were a whirlwind of discovery and adjustment. Tessa learned that Patrick was not just wealthy but seriously, almost absurdly wealthy. Rosewood Enterprises was a massive operation with international reach, holdings in shipping, real estate, and renewable energy. Patrick ran it with a competence that surprised her, given how self-deprecating he'd been about his work. He was smart and strategic, commanding in board meetings, respected by his employees. He was also still the man who helped her repot orchids every weekend, who wrote her notes on fancy stationery just because he could, who brought her coffee exactly how she liked it, and listened to her talk about root systems like it was the most fascinating subject in the world. Meeting his family was intimidating. Patrick's older brother Marcus was initially suspicious of her, clearly worried she was after the family money. His sister Paulina was warmer but cautious, protective of Patrick after watching him struggle through their mother's death and the weight of responsibility that followed. But they came around, especially after Paulina caught Tessa reading Patrick one of his old letters, both of them laughing at something he'd written 6 months ago. You really care about him, Paulina said later, cornering Tessa in the kitchen during a family dinner. I really do, Tessa said simply. I loved him before I knew who he was, and I love him now that I do. The rest is just details. Good, because he lights up around you in a way I haven't seen since Mom died. You're good for him. Tessa's world expanded to include charity galas and business dinners, learning to navigate social situations she'd never dreamed of attending. Patrick was patient with her discomfort, protective without being patronizing, always making sure she felt like his equal partner rather than an accessory. He also made it clear to everyone that Tessa's career mattered. When someone at a dinner party asked what she did with a tone that suggested it was just a hobby until marriage, Patrick shut it down immediately. Tessa is a horticulturist specializing in rare orchids and sustainable garden design. She's consulted for 3 major botanical institutions and has a waiting list of clients. She's brilliant at what she does, and she works harder than most people I know. Tessa squeezed his hand under the table, falling a little more in love. She introduced him to her world too. Her friends from the botanical garden loved him once they got over the shock of her dating a CEO. He won them over by asking intelligent questions about their work and funding a grant for urban garden initiatives without being asked. He met her mother, who was suspicious until Patrick spent an hour genuinely listening to her talk about her nursing career and the challenges of healthcare systems. He helped Tessa expand her fire escape garden, building custom planters and not complaining when dirt got everywhere. This is what I meant in those letters, he told her one evening as they watered her plants, the city spread out below them. About wanting a real life, this. Getting dirt under my fingernails with you, this is more real than any board meeting. 6 months after the greenhouse revelation, Patrick took Tessa back to where they'd officially met, though now she knew it was actually where they'd physically met for the first time. The greenhouse was thriving under their combined care, a living testament to attention and patience. "I have something for you," Patrick said, pulling a familiar cream-colored envelope from his pocket. "You're not supposed to write me letters anymore," Tessa teased. "That was the deal. This one's special. Humor me." She opened it, and inside was a letter in Patrick's distinctive handwriting. "Dearest Tessa," it read. "6 months ago, I met you twice. Once on paper, where you taught me that vulnerability could be a strength. Once in person, where you taught me that connection could still be genuine. You've transformed more than just my mother's greenhouse. You've brought color and life and possibility into spaces I thought were permanently gray. I love you in every form, on paper and in person, in letters and in reality. But I'd very much like to spend the rest of my life loving you in person, if you'll have me. Your friend, your partner, forever yours, Patrick." When Tessa looked up, tears blurring her vision, Patrick was on one knee, holding a ring that caught the greenhouse light and scattered it into rainbows. "Tessa Crawford, will you marry me?" "Yes," she said, laughing through tears. "Yes, absolutely yes." The ring slid onto her finger and Patrick stood, lifting her off her feet as he kissed her. Around them, orchids bloomed in shades of pink and white and gold, beauty coaxed from patience and care. "I love you," Tessa said against his mouth. "I loved you in letters, I love you now, I'll love you forever." "Forever sounds perfect," Patrick said. "Absolutely perfect." They were married 6 months later in the greenhouse because where else would they exchange vows? It was late spring, and every plant was in full bloom, the air thick with perfume and possibility. Tessa's grandmother, Rose, sat in the front row, looking insufferably pleased with herself for starting the whole thing. Patrick's siblings stood with them, Marcus as best man, Paulina as Tessa's maid of honor, their initial wariness transformed into genuine affection. Tessa wore a simple dress, cream-colored like the letters that had started everything, with orchids in her hair. Patrick wore a dark suit and looked at her like she'd hung the moon. They exchanged traditional vows and personal ones, promises written in their own handwriting, and read with voices that shook with emotion. When the officiant pronounced them married, Patrick cupped her face in his hands the way he had that first kiss and whispered, "Hello, wife." "Hello, husband," Tessa whispered back, and kissed him as their family and friends erupted in applause. The reception was held on the grounds of the estate, elegant but warm, full of flowers and laughter. Patrick had insisted that half the guest list be Tessa's friends and colleagues, people from the botanical garden and her urban farming initiatives. The result was a beautiful mix of worlds colliding. Business moguls talking soil composition with community gardeners, everyone united in celebrating the couple. During their first dance, Tessa rested her head on Patrick's chest, feeling his heartbeat steady beneath her cheek. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly. "That I almost didn't write back. That first letter from you, I almost threw it away thinking it was weird. We came so close to missing each other. But we didn't." His arms tightened around her. "Against all odds, through grandmother's meddling and a dying greenhouse, we found each other. Twice. Best coincidence of my life. Mine too." They honeymooned in Costa Rica, spending 2 weeks exploring cloud forests and learning about tropical orchid conservation. Patrick proved his plant incompetence had been exaggerated. He was actually a quick study when he cared about something. They hiked through rainforests, spent lazy afternoons in their villa, made love with the windows open and the sound of howler monkeys in the distance. They talked about the future, about what their life together would look like. "I want to step back from the business," Patrick told her one evening on their balcony, the jungle alive around them. "Not completely, but I want Marcus to take over as CEO. I've been thinking about it for a while. I want time to actually live, Tessa. To work on projects I care about, travel when we want to, not be chained to board meetings and quarterly reports." "Are you sure?" Tessa asked. "I don't want you to resent me if you give up something important. You're what's important. This life we're building, it's what I want. The business will be fine with Marcus running it. Better, probably. He lives for that stuff in a way I never have." Patrick pulled her close. "Besides, someone needs to keep our home greenhouse running. I've gotten attached to those orchids." "Our greenhouse," Tessa repeated, liking the sound of it. "Our home, our life." "Ours," Patrick agreed. "Everything." They returned home to their new reality. Patrick transitioned leadership of Rosewood Enterprises to his brother, maintaining a board position but stepping out of day-to-day operations. The business world was shocked, the Rosewood heir walking away from Empire. But Patrick didn't care about their opinions. He'd spent too many years living for expectations, and he was done. Instead, he threw himself into projects that mattered to him. He worked with Tessa on expanding urban garden initiatives, using his business acumen and her botanical expertise to create sustainable programs across the city. They developed a foundation focused on environmental conservation, funding research and education. Patrick discovered he loved the work, the tangible impact, the ability to make decisions based on passion rather than profit margins. Tessa continued her work at the Botanical Garden and took on select private clients, building a reputation as one of the best orchid specialists in the region. She loved that her career stood on its own merit, that she'd built something independent even while being married to wealth. Patrick supported her ambitions completely, proud in a way that made her heart full. They hosted dinner parties in their home, the guest list a mix of Patrick's business associates and Tessa's garden friends, breaking down the barriers between worlds. They traveled frequently, chasing rare plants and new experiences. They turned the estate's greenhouse into something legendary, a showpiece that Tessa opened quarterly for public tours, sharing her passion with anyone who wanted to learn. They built a life that was theirs, unconventional and beautiful. 2 years into their marriage, on a quiet Sunday morning in the greenhouse, Tessa had news. Patrick was checking soil moisture, a task he now performed with practiced competence, when she approached him with an envelope. "What's this?" he asked, recognizing the cream-colored stationery they kept for special occasions. "Open it." Inside was a single line in Tessa's handwriting. "Our family is growing. We're going to need a bigger greenhouse." Patrick stared at the words, processing, and then his face transformed with joy. "You're pregnant?" "I'm pregnant," Tessa confirmed, laughing as he lifted her carefully, spinning her around before setting her down with exaggerated gentleness. "We're having a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "A actual tiny person. A tiny person who will probably inherit your hair and hopefully my plant skills," Tessa teased. Patrick dropped to his knees, pressing his face to her still flat stomach. "Hello in there. I'm your dad. I'm going to do my best not to kill any plants while teaching you about life, but your mom will probably handle the botanical education. I'll teach you everything else, though. How to be brave and kind and how to find people who see you for who you are. I'll tell you about how I met your mother twice and how she saved me without even knowing I needed saving." Tessa ran her fingers through his hair, tears streaming down her face. "You're going to be such a good father." "We're going to be good parents," Patrick corrected, standing and pulling her close. Together, the pregnancy was smooth, and Tessa glowed in a way that made Patrick fall even more in love if that was possible. He was attentive without being overbearing, accompanying her to appointments, reading every parenting book he could find, converting one of the estate's rooms into a nursery with the same careful attention he'd learned to give plants. They painted the nursery walls with a mural of a greenhouse, flowers and vines climbing toward a painted sky. Tessa directed while Patrick executed, their teamwork as seamless as everything else they did together. "Our kid is going to grow up so loved," Patrick said one evening, stepping back to admire their work. "So incredibly loved," Tessa agreed. Their daughter was born on a snowy January morning, arriving 3 weeks early, and immediately making her presence known with lusty cries that suggested she had inherited both parents' stubborn determination. They named her Rose Evelyn Rosewood, Rose for Tessa's grandmother who'd started everything, Evelyn for Patrick's mother who'd left them the greenhouse that brought them together. Patrick held his daughter for the first time with hands that shook, his face wet with tears. "She's perfect. Tessa, she's absolutely perfect." "She really is," Tessa said, exhausted and exhilarated. Rose was indeed perfect, a tiny miracle with dark hair and gray eyes and her father's serious expression even as a newborn. Patrick was instantly besotted, the powerful CEO completely undone by 8 pounds of baby. Tessa watched him with their daughter and fell in love all over again, seeing this gentle side of him bloom. They navigated new parenthood together, sleep-deprived and covered in spit-up and happier than either had imagined possible. Patrick took paternity leave, his first real break from work obligations, and devoted himself entirely to his family. They spent long nights walking Rose around the greenhouse, using the warm space when the house felt too cold, surrounded by blooming orchids while their daughter dozed against Patrick's chest. "This is everything," Patrick murmured one night, swaying gently with Rose while Tessa watched from a bench. "This moment, right here, this is what I was searching for in those letters, this feeling of being exactly where I'm supposed to be." "Me too," Tessa said softly. "Me too." Rose grew, as babies do, transforming from tiny newborn to chubby infant to curious toddler with alarming speed. She developed her mother's love of growing things, her father's determination, and her own unique personality that was pure sunshine. By 18 months, she was toddling around the greenhouse, patting leaves with gentle hands, saying flower and pretty and mama and dada with equal enthusiasm. Tessa and Patrick expanded their family foundation, creating programs that combined environmental education with community support. They hired dedicated staff, built partnerships, made real differences in people's lives. It was fulfilling work that allowed them to use Patrick's resources and both their passions in meaningful ways. On their 5th wedding anniversary, they returned to the greenhouse where they'd met, where Patrick had proposed, where they'd married. It was evening, and they'd left Rose with Patrick's sister for the night, stealing time alone together. 5 years, Tessa said, leaning against Patrick as they surveyed the space. "Feels longer, feels like forever." "In the best way," Patrick said. "I can barely remember what life was like before you, just this vague gray existence where I went through motions and pretended to be fine." "You wrote me a letter asking for connection," Tessa reminded him. "You were brave enough to reach out into the void. Best decision I ever made, besides hiring you to save these plants." He turned her to face him. "I love you, Tessa. More now than the day we married, more than yesterday, less than tomorrow. You're my best friend and my partner and the love of my life. Thank you for writing back. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for choosing this life with me." Tessa kissed him, soft and deep, 5 years of love and partnership and growing together in that kiss. Thank you for being worth choosing, for being everything those letters promised and more, for giving me a life more beautiful than anything I could have imagined. Should we write each other letters? Patrick asked, only half joking. For old time's sake. No, Tessa decided. I like this better. Being able to tell you everything, see your face when I say I love you, kiss you whenever I want. Reality with you is better than any letter could ever be. Reality with you is perfect, Patrick agreed. They stayed in the greenhouse until the moon rose, talking and kissing and planning their future. They talked about maybe having another baby, about Rose starting preschool, about the foundation's expansion plans, about a trip they wanted to take to Madagascar to see wild orchids. They talked about everything and nothing, the way they always had, the conversation flowing as easily as it had in letters and in person from the very beginning. When they finally headed back to the house, walking hand in hand through the garden they'd planted together, Tessa felt a wave of gratitude so strong it almost staggered her. This life, this love, this partnership built on letters and luck and the courage to be vulnerable with a stranger. "What are you thinking?" Patrick asked, tuning into her mood the way he always did. "That your mother would be proud, that my grandmother is probably impossibly smug, that we're really lucky." "The luckiest," Patrick agreed, "though I prefer to think of it as fate. We were always going to find each other, Tessa. One way or another, through letters or greenhouses or sheer stubborn determination, we were always going to end up here. You think so, I know so. Some people are meant to find each other. We're those people." Tessa squeezed his hand, looking up at their home with its warm lights glowing against the night sky. Inside, their daughter slept peacefully, probably dreaming baby dreams. Around them, the garden whispered with night sounds and growing things. Ahead, their future stretched out full of promise and possibility. "Yeah," she said softly, "we really are." 3 years later, they welcomed a son, Peter Marcus Rosewood, who inherited his mother's red highlights and his father's love of organization. Rose adored her baby brother immediately, declaring herself his protector and teacher. The greenhouse became their family headquarters, both children growing up among rare orchids, and the story of how their parents fell in love twice. Rose, at 5, loved to hear the story, making them tell it over and over. "Tell me about the letters, Daddy," she'd demand, and Patrick would scoop her up and tell her about writing to a stranger and finding his soulmate. "The moral of the story," Patrick would say, booping Rose's nose, "is that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for connection. Sometimes reaching out to someone, being vulnerable, being honest about needing people, that's what changes everything." "And the other moral," Tessa would add, joining them, "is that love can surprise you. It shows up in unexpected ways, through unexpected people, and your only job is to be brave enough to recognize it and hold on to it tight." "Like you hold on to Daddy?" Rose would ask. "Exactly like I hold on to Daddy," Tessa would confirm. As the years passed, their love deepened in ways they hadn't anticipated. The passion remained, but it was joined by profound partnership, by the intimacy that came from weathering life's challenges together, from building something meaningful side by side. They had arguments, of course, disagreements about parenting and money and how to spend their time. But they'd learned to fight fair, to listen, to remember that they were on the same team. Patrick occasionally still wrote her letters, leaving them in unexpected places for her to find. Notes on her pillow, tucked into her gardening gloves, slipped into her lunch. They were never long, just reminders that he saw her, loved her, chose her every day. Tessa left him flowers, specific varieties that meant things in the language of blooms she taught him. "Orchids for love," roses for devotion, forget-me-nots for memories of how they'd met. They grew older together, silver threading through their hair, laugh lines deepening around their eyes. The greenhouse remained their sanctuary, the place they returned to when they needed to remember what mattered. Their children grew and flourished, Rose showing signs of inheriting her mother's gift with plants, Peter demonstrating his father's head for strategy and organization. The foundation they'd built became their legacy, outliving them, impacting thousands of lives. They created jobs, funded education, protected endangered species, transformed urban spaces into green havens. They did it together, equal partners in every sense on their 20th anniversary, surrounded by children and friends and the greenhouse in full bloom. Patrick stood to make a toast. 20 years ago I was lost, successful by every external measure but empty inside. I wrote a letter asking a stranger for connection, never imagining where it would lead. That letter brought me Tessa twice over, and everything good in my life flows from that moment of vulnerability. He found Tessa in the crowd, holding her gaze. You taught me that love is both profound and simple, that it's built in moments of shared work, in honest conversations, in choosing each other every single day. You gave me a real life, the one I was afraid to believe I could have. Thank you for 20 years of choosing me. I promise you 20 more and 20 after that, and all the time we're given. Tessa stood, meeting him halfway, kissing him in front of everyone because 20 years hadn't diminished the need to be close to him. To 20 more, she said. To forever, however long we get. To forever, Patrick echoed, and around them in the greenhouse where two lonely people had once met through coincidence and courage, orchids bloomed in impossible colors, beauty coaxed from patience and care and the persistent, transformative power of love. Years became decades, and their love story became legend in their family. The tale of the pen pal millionaire and the horticulturist who fell in love twice with the same person. Rose told her own children, Peter told his, the story growing with each retelling but the core remaining the same. Two people brave enough to be vulnerable, lucky enough to find each other, wise enough to hold on. Tessa and Patrick grew old together in the greenhouse, still tending the orchids that had brought them together, still finding new things to talk about, still choosing each other with the same certainty they'd felt when words on a page had first made their hearts race. In their 80s, still holding hands like newlyweds, still finishing each other's sentences, still finding joy in dirt and growing things and the life they'd built from letters and luck. They would look at each other and know. This was the happily ever after they'd written together, one day and one choice at a time, and it was more beautiful than any story could capture. It was real, it was theirs, and it was exactly right.